These thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place. Hello, I'm Carla, psychotherapist and mindset coach, and on this channel, I help you get unstuck and reach your goals by exploring topics that shift your mindset so you can live your highest potential. We are on lesson 4 of A Course in Miracles. I'm going to start with reading the lesson here and then reading the notes from Ken Wapnick's amazing book, A Journey Through the Workbook of A Course in Miracles. Let's dive in. Lesson 4. These thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place. Unlike the preceding ones, these exercises do not begin with the idea for the day. In these practice periods, begin with noting the thoughts that are crossing your mind for about a minute. Then apply the idea to them. If you are already aware of unhappy thoughts, use them as subjects for the idea. Do not, however, select only the thoughts that you think are bad. You will find, if you train yourself to look at your thoughts, that they represent such a mixture that, in a sense, none of them can be called good or bad. This is why they do not mean anything. In selecting the subjects for the application of today's idea, the usual specificity is required. Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represents your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. The good ones are but shadows of what lies beyond, and shadows make sight difficult. The bad ones are blocks to sight and make seeing impossible. You do not want either. This is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. The aim here is to train you in the first steps toward the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. It is a first attempt in the long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside you and the meaningful within. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. In using your thoughts for application of the idea for today, identify each thought by the central figure or event it contains. For example, this thought about blank does not mean anything. It is like the things I see in this room, on this street, and so on. You can also use the idea for a particular thought that you recognize as harmful. This practice is useful, but is not a substitute for the more random procedures to be followed for the exercises. Do not, however, examine your mind for more than a minute or so. You are too inexperienced as yet to avoid a tendency to become pointlessly preoccupied. Further, since these exercises are the first of their kind, you may find the suspension of judgment in connection with thoughts particularly difficult. Do not repeat these exercises more than 3 or 4 times during the day. We will return to them later. All right, on to the big book. Let's see what the notes say. Lesson 4, these thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on the street, from this window, in this place. Jesus is helping us realize it is not only what we see that has no meaning, but our thoughts about what we see have no meaning as well. In later lessons, he explains that our thoughts are no different from what we perceive. The inner and outer are one and the same. Both our perception and thinking are variable. What is variable is not unchanging by definition, and if it is not unchanging, it cannot be of God. This statement reflects one of the core premises on which the logic of A Course in Miracles rests. Anything of God must share in his attributes. If it does not, it cannot be of him, and so must be unreal or illusory. Thus, if there is something that changes, it cannot be of the changeless, and therefore does not exist and must be inherently meaningless, having separated from what alone has meaning. As we pay attention to our thoughts, therefore, we shall see their randomness, variableness, and fleeting nature, all of which attest to their meaninglessness. That's one thing that I notice as a therapist. We give so much authority and we take our thoughts so serious. A lot of my clients, they feel really bad or embarrassed or like telling me like, I have intrusive thoughts, I can't stop thinking. It's like, that is the nature of thoughts. They are not logical. They make absolutely no sense. People really beat themselves up over the thoughts that they think. It's like, they're not yours, honey, especially those intrusive thoughts. They feel like they need to like find out where they came from. It's like, they're floating around in the ether. But even if they were repetitive and they came from inside of you, it's like, how much authority are we giving them? We give too much power and too much reverence for our thoughts. We think we have to take them all seriously. I always use the example of intrusive thoughts. Think of it like an intruder in your home. When an intruder comes in, do you welcome it into your space and offer it a meal and a cup of tea and entertain it? No. So don't do that with your intrusive thoughts either, or any thought for that matter, especially the ones that don't feel good. Okay, so as we pay attention to our thoughts, therefore, we shall see their randomness, variableness, and fleeting nature, all of which attest to their meaninglessness. As variable, therefore, they must be of the ego, which is always about change, owing its origin to the original change from the changeless one. These early lessons, with their deceptively simple exercises, point us gradually and gently to the recognition of their truth as we apply them to our everyday lives. Our real thoughts are of love or oneness, which must be non-specific, A Course in Miracles definition of the term abstract. These abstract thoughts are covered by the ego's world of specifics. What we want is the truth, not a shadow or block. Like good Platonists, we want the good that lies beyond the concept of good. Good and bad are concepts. And as we are taught near the end of the text, salvation can be seen as nothing more than the escape from concepts. It does not concern itself with content of the mind, but with the simple statement that it thinks. At best, our right-minded thoughts, the good, are the corrections for our wrong-minded ones, the bad. But in the end, their specificity, too, must disappear into the abstract or non-specific love of our source. Ken references the lesson. It is a first attempt in the long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside you and the meaningful within. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. This is a pregnant thought. The meaningless is outside because what is outside is unreal. The meaningful within are the Holy Spirit's thoughts in our mind. Anything that we perceive outside and believe is real serves the purpose of the ego, which is to keep us thinking that what is meaningless is true. All of this then becomes a cover for the truly meaningful. The Holy Spirit, however, teaches us to see that what is out in the world serves the purpose of teaching us that there is no world. Therein lies its meaning. Let me read that again. The Holy Spirit, however, teaches us to see that what is out in the world serves the purpose of teaching us that there is no world. Therein lies its meaning. The objects are not meaningful in themselves, but the Holy Spirit's purpose supplies their meaning. Everything seen without him is meaningless. That's kind of what I referred to in one of those earlier lessons as I was saying, what about all the beautiful things in this world, like the flowers and the sunsets, and like, we were so taught and it's so ingrained in me, like God created the heaven and the earth and the beautiful moon and the sunsets and the clouds. And that was really hard for me. But like I said, my teacher told me, Carla, instead of seeing the beautiful sunset as, oh my God, God created that, you can look at the sunset and feel the presence of God, not because God is in the sunset or God made the sunset, but because God is in your mind. I see God in that sunset because God is in my mind. I see God in that flower because God is in my mind. Not because God is the flower, not because God made the flower, but God is in my mind. So everything we see, if we see the flower outside of us as God, that means God is separate from us, and everything seen without him is meaningless. So really the true way to enjoy the flower or enjoy the sunset is to know or have the awareness or start to understand that God is not in that flower and separate from you. God is within you, and you're simply looking with him at this flower. So everything, if we see something without him, that's really meaningless. But if we see it with him, it's meaningful. The ego has us value what is in the world so that we will believe in the reality of the thought system of separation the world reflects. So that's another thing. If we continue to believe the illusion of the ego, the delusion, that God did create this world, that perpetuates that we are separate, that we are not one. So the ego has us value what is in the world so that we will believe in the reality of the thought system of separation the world reflects. The Holy Spirit has us perceive what is in the world so that we will ultimately realize that there is no world. Thus, what is the same is everything within the ego's thought system and everything within the Holy Spirit's thought system. Guilt is guilt, regardless of its form. Love is love, regardless of its form. But these two systems differ from each other because the ego's thought system roots us further in hell, while the Holy Spirit's brings us home. Thus, we learn the inherent sameness of all thoughts within the two thought systems and the intrinsic difference between these two. Referring to the lesson again, in using your thoughts for application of the idea for today, identify each thought by the central figure or event it contains. For example, this thought about blank does not mean anything. It is like the things I see in this room. Note this early emphasis, to be repeated throughout, on the need to be specific in our application of the day's ideas. Without such application, the exercises are meaningless to us. You can also use the idea for a particular thought that you recognize as harmful. This practice is useful, but is not a substitute for the more random procedures to be followed for the exercise. Do not, however, examine your mind for more than a minute or so. This is part of Jesus's purpose in making us feel humble. We do not yet know the difference between what is harmful and what is harmless. This is similar to his introduction to us in the text that we do not know the difference between pain and joy, and imprisonment and freedom. And so we pointlessly preoccupy ourselves with pursuing what will hurt us rather than learning what alone will bring us peace and joy. Back to the lesson. Further, since these exercises are not the first of their kind, you may find the suspension of judgment in connection with thoughts particularly difficult. Do not repeat these exercises more than 3 or 4 times per day. I love this part. Jesus does not want you to feel guilty because you cannot do the exercises, but he does want you to be aware that you are having trouble doing them. Implied in that is the following statement: I am having trouble doing them because I do not want to give up my belief, not only that the objects in my life are meaningful, as are my thoughts, but that I am meaningful. I, as an individual, special being, am meaningful. That is why these lessons are particularly difficult. That's the truth. It's one thing to, say these things of like, this microphone is meaningless, this pen is meaningless, this arm is meaningless. But going in and like our thoughts are meaningless, these thoughts do not mean anything. Our ego screams like, but what about me? And that is the whole point. We are addicted to being separate. And that perpetuates that guilt that we feel. All right, that was lesson 4, y'all. I hope you enjoyed that. I am certainly enjoying doing these lessons. Leave comments, ask me any questions. Thank you for being on this journey with me. I will see you next time.